Hi, my name is Eva Steiner and this is my project Psychotherapists Around the Globe. I am interviewing the psychotherapists around the world and asking them the same 8 questions. I am wondering how mental health profession is in their country. Today we are going to... Thank you for taking your time for doing this interview with me. Before we start, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yes, of course. So I'm Joanna. I'm originally from Portugal. Now I live in Luxembourg, where I work as a psychologist in an independent, with private clients as well as with companies.
Tell me a little bit about your culture. What is some holiday or tradition that your country celebrates? And if your culture would be an emotion, what emotion would it be?
I live in Luxembourg and I grew up in a Portuguese community. And for those who don't know, Luxembourg is a really tiny country. We only have like 650,000 people, and 49% of them are foreigners. So basically, it's a huge multicultural community, and it's really difficult to have just one big thing about the culture because there are so many different countries. We have people from over 170 countries. So all of them have different backgrounds, different religions, languages, mentalities, and just the way they see the world and they perceive it. To give you an example, everybody in our country speaks at least 3 languages if they are not a foreigner. So everybody speaks like Luxembourgish, French, and German. And then people from abroad, they still speak their mother tongue, right? And for me, this is so unique and it gets really complex that I would say it's just a very big people mass. I don't know how to explain it. But yes, the holidays and traditions we have are like the ones in Europe overall, like Easter and Halloween, the National Day, obviously, and then Christmas. And then all the other communities have their own traditions, like Ramadan, for example. And it's really just common knowledge for everybody in Luxembourg, and it's really accommodating. So, for example, if you're doing Ramadan and you're at school, normally you don't have to do sports, so they really try and accommodate you in this way. Obviously, not every time and everywhere, but they do try it. So, if I would have to give an emotion to Luxembourg because of this complexity, I think it's more like a variety of emotions or words. It's like a trustworthy country with hardworking people, also searching for some social recognition. One big word would really be the multiculturalism.
How did you become a psychotherapist and what is your therapeutic approach?
I don't know if this is really important, but for me, it feels like it is. I've noticed working in different countries that the terms psychotherapist and psychologist are used very differently. So, just for the information, here in Luxembourg, we use psychologists as people with the basic academic skills, let's say, and then psychotherapist for people who have done even more. So, in my case, I'm a psychologist. For this, I did a 3-year bachelor in educational psychology and 2-year master's in clinical psychology in Switzerland. So when I came back to Luxembourg, I am a psychologist. Now I started a 3-year master's, a second one then, in psychotherapy itself, in the approach of CBT, because for me it's just more integrative and for me, I just think it's amazing. And after I'm done with this, then I will be a psychotherapist.
Mm-hmm. And in general in Luxembourg, can you just go directly to the direction? Or for example, if I am an economist and I will go to this Master of Psychotherapy, is this possible or not? Or you need to be a psychologist?
No, it's not possible. Actually, you have to have 5 years bachelor in psychology, normally clinical psychology, and only then you can do psychotherapy, unless you're a doctor with a specialization in psychiatry. And then if you're a psychiatrist, you can do the psychotherapy masters as well.
So there is no profession in a sense that stands alone as a psychotherapist and you go to just psychotherapy education.
No, not really. Only if, as again, you are a psychologist as first and then psychotherapist. So it's not like only a psychotherapist. No.
And is there any law for psychology, psychotherapy?
That's a really good, interesting question also. So psychologists are not like a regulated profession. So I can just prove that I have my diploma and then work whatever I want with whom I want. But the psychotherapists, they are regulated, they have all kind of laws, and they are registered in something specific, and they have to give all sorts of papers in. For them, it's different still.
And how is help available for a client? As a client, do you go through public health system to get psychological help, or through private, or both?
It's a really interesting question, actually, because it really depends. If you go to a psychologist, public health doesn't pay for it. And if you go to a psychotherapist, they do, if you have like a medical prescription. But there is a lack of psychotherapists. There are really not enough. So people stay on waiting lists for ages. So they do go to psychologists. And if you have like a second like insurance, then they cover parts of it, but it's not huge. But usually, if you're lucky and you have a psychotherapist, you can just go to a public one and they will just pay for it.
Interesting. It's reverse. Usually, I never heard that psychologists won't get paid through public system. Like,
yeah,
okay, what's happening here? So interesting. The third question: how society looks upon psychotherapy or any psychological help?
Again, I know I'm a pain a bit with this, but because of the multiculturalism, for me, there is not a one size fits all answer. Because, for example, if I work with a community coming from the US, it's really normal to go to the therapist, is not seen as something bad per se. I think it's because there is just less stigma attached to it. Maybe also because they are from abroad and they have lived so many different experiences that they are not attached to the bad negative stigma that psychotherapists and therapists can have. But when I work with, for instance, the Portuguese community, which is a very big percentage of my clients, they see therapy as something like a weakness. They always tell me, oh, and now that I am here with you, I know I'm going crazy. So they really feel like very negative about the therapy itself. So they also have this very interesting idea that they will have to take medication for the rest of their lives and that they will be stuck to me forever and really being dependent on the therapy. So when they do come to therapy, they've waited a long, long time and they've tried everything else. On the other hand, when I work with Luxembourgish community, it's seen more like a group work where they kind of come for a specific struggle they are going through and they need just strategies. And then it's really like I give something and then he brings something to the table, and it's really like a teamwork. And they know it's just for a moment and then they will go on with their lives and that's it. And obviously everything I mentioned doesn't apply to everyone because everybody is different. But this is the idea that I get, at least from the people I've been seeing and the people I talk to, also friends and coworkers. I think the government plays a big part in this staying this way also, because I think there is a big room for improvement. But because it's not in the basic treatments that they pay for example, for psychologists, for me, it should be like, okay, you are struggling mentally. Okay, that's something that could happen to anyone. So everybody should have access to support. So that's why we pay for it. And I think like by keeping the psychologists of being paid for by the government, it kind of sends the wrong idea of, okay, if you're going to a psychologist, then you should be taking care of it because it's just not like something we should be paying for and so on, even though they are paying for everything else. So yeah, I think they could really do something to improve the situation.
And how many people then decide to study psychology if this profession is not really supported?
Oh, to be honest, I don't really know because I didn't study psychology in Luxembourg. My master's I'm doing in Paris. So I am not really aware. I know there are a lot of psychologists, but to be honest, mostly come from France. So for instance, if we have children that are looking for psychologists or psychotherapists, we have a big problem because small children only speaking Luxembourgish don't have almost no support. So I think it's not like something that is really nice that people are trying to follow as a job because of all these things. But there are still some who really like the job itself and they just say, okay, well, we'll do it anyway. And then like I did, I just do the psychotherapy masters and then people will have more support.
And child psychologist is also not supported by the government.
No, not really. If you go to a psychotherapist, then yes, but there are like psychologists in all schools. So if there is a problem, they usually have access to a psychologist at school and then they kind of work together with the parents. But obviously it's not enough.
Okay, the fourth question. What is your society teaching about child-parent relationship, and whether this value of society also influence how you design your interventions as a therapist?
So again, there is not a size-fits-all answer. I really see this, and I know because of the Portuguese clients, and I think it's also normal because I'm Portuguese, that I have such a big community with the Portuguese. But there is a pattern of the same feeling somehow in the relationships between children and parents. So in families where the children were born before 2000, there is like this big idea of hierarchy and power levels. So basically, the parents are like really authoritarian, and whatever they say counts. And if they do it differently, it doesn't matter. It's what they say and not what they do. The child has this idea that they always have to conform to what the parents say, obey no matter what. And then they keep this idea very long, sometimes until their adulthood and sometimes even longer. And these relationships are really tight and close, which can be something nice, but sometimes it gets really unhealthy for the child that has become an adult because they develop all sort of unhealthy beliefs about themselves, that they cannot stand up to their parent that is doing something bad to them, or that they can't tell the parents that they are too involved and getting into their lives too much. So sometimes they do feel also the need to discuss something about their parents in the therapy, and they feel really guilty about it because for them it's like a lack of respect, and even if they did them wrong, they should not talk about family and all their problems. It's supposed to be like very secretive, so they have a lot of problem distancing themselves from family or family members, or even separate themselves, even if this would be something that would be healthier for them. So they really try to do everything else, and sometimes even stay in an unhealthy behavior and dynamic to not go against their parents, which then for me in therapy, obviously I have to have this in the back of my mind, because then I will try to give other strategies and other perspectives than just try to make them see different dynamics, because sometimes even that is difficult for them to see the dynamics that are unhealthy for them. It's just something very natural. And when I see the Luxembourgish community, German, French, and all the other people, the hierarchy is present, but the power dynamics are different. It's more about preparing the child for society, for life, still having obviously an emotional attachment to them, but being able to let them go when the moment comes. So when there are families with difficult dynamics, the person, so the client in therapy, is able to see these dynamics more easily. And also, it's easier for them to detach themselves or separate themselves from a family member if needed. So they do see, okay, it would be healthy if I wouldn't be in a relationship to this person anymore. And they kind of cut them off, obviously. And this is all the thing that you're doing, is trying to understand how the cultural influences also the therapy and the therapist. And for me, it's really like sometimes I see myself being different or doing different things that for me don't seem appropriate, but that I know in this culture it's appropriate, and I couldn't do it any other way without it feeling weird.
And if an adult client would come to you and say, I don't want to see my parents anymore, I want to cut contact with them, how would you approach? Now you mentioned different culture. Maybe you can also mention how would you approach in Portuguese community or maybe in Luxembourg community and so on.
Well, I think with the Portuguese community, I would try to understand the guilt that they are probably feeling. So obviously understanding why do you think that, why do you want to do that, and so on. But very often it comes to this point of, oh, but I feel guilty, so I can't. So really try to also maybe see that it's also something cultural, that it doesn't have to be one truth, and that they obviously they can feel guilty about it, but there is no need to feel guilty about it. So if they wanted to do it, and if they feel that it's something healthy to do, then we could approach and see, okay, how can you do it so it's the best for you, and so on. And in the Luxembourgish community, it's more about understanding the problem itself. Okay, but what happened? What makes you think of that? And then kind of give them strategies to just put it maybe into place and into practice, more than trying to see all these guilty feelings. Obviously, everybody kind of feels guilty about it, But I just feel like in the Portuguese community, it's really a huge black thing above the head that is just always present.
What are the learned beliefs regarding client-therapist relationship, and can the relationship continue outside the therapy once the therapy process is over?
There are no legal laws about this in Luxembourg, so we do have like an ethical contract, I call it now like this, where they do say that we need to study more, keep up to date with research, and so on and so forth. But there is nothing actually mentioning the relationship to the clients. But in my opinion, it just doesn't feel ethical to continue relationship from therapy into kind of a friendship, or I don't know, something more casual. Just I don't feel comfortable with it, because I would always be thinking to myself, oh, but yeah, she was just very vulnerable, or he very vulnerable with me, so I know all these kind of things about this person. And I don't know, also the question of, the professional secrecy in Luxembourg, it's after the death of the client, so I always have to keep all information secret, even when the client is dead and after that. So I would always be questioning myself, like, okay, what did this person told me in therapy, and what did I get from the relationship? It just doesn't feel healthy to me and ethical, and I just wouldn't know where to draw the line, to be honest. But I think this is personal in Luxembourg. I don't know if others feel the same.
Where the client can turn to if the therapist is crossing the line. So basically, if the therapist is the one that is abusive, crossing the line, maybe pursuing a romantic relationship.
There is a society where we psychologists can be registered, but we don't have to. But all clients, everybody has access to this platform, and they can just do a complaint about a specific psychologist, even if he's not in the register. So they are there.
Is supervision a must for a therapist in your country?
Unfortunately, no. So for psychotherapists, maybe this is different. I'm not really aware, to be honest, but there is no legal obligation. I go to supervisions, but I have to pay for them. But I think this is like this everywhere. But I do go because I think it's really important, and it helps myself, not only just the clients. And yeah, it's just not an obligation whatsoever. It's not written anywhere.
What are the most common complaints that the clients come to therapy for?
So I have very different types of clients because I work private and in the companies, but I have a lot of clients complaining about burnout symptoms, which again in Luxembourg makes a lot of sense because people work so much and they really have this work necessity and this just working kind of idea of life. And then I have lots of clients from a big four. They complain about having no work-life balance, the lack of life quality, sleep, everything, honestly, that just makes their well-being so low. But I also have many people coming for anxiety disorders, like panic disorders or phobias. Very weirdly enough, in Luxembourg, lots of people have phobias of public transport for some reason. And then, as I mentioned before, eating disorders and depressions, which during the winter obviously go up a lot. And then when people come without a specific disorder, they really come complaining about a lack of self-esteem, the inability to set boundaries, and just struggling into self-regulation.
Can you tell me a little bit more about this work attitude?
In Luxembourg, everything is about working. So when you are studying, it's like you have to study, be the best. Really, there is a lot of performance pressure. And at work, it's the same. So you work only 40 hours a week. When I say only, I think it's a lot. But for other countries, it's not that much. But it's always about working. So you wake up in the morning, you really have to stress yourself to go to work. And seen as the country has a lot of money, so we have lots of people coming from other countries to work only. So French people and German, for example, they come every day and they leave every day, and usually they spend 2 hours in the morning driving and 2 hours in the afternoon as well to go home. So this also builds up about like they leave their house at 6 o'clock, leave their children somewhere, go to work until 6 o'clock, 7 p.m. and then go home. It's just like if you don't work and you're not successful, then you're not worth it, basically.
Do you feel that there is any like a generational trauma or any like country history event that you feel is still influencing the population right now?
Yes, I think especially for foreigners, there is this really need of combating, and like we have to get our lives better now that we emigrated to another country, so they really have to work a lot as well. So even in normal jobs, I'm not talking about like big company jobs, people have this status that they have to keep. And I do think that this is in a big part due to the transgenerational experiences and then the keeping up with the family's expectations as well. With Luxembourgish people that are not foreigners, obviously, I think it's more about the social status because in Luxembourg is the bigger house, the bigger car, the best you are. So I do think that it's also keeping up with this because it's such a rich country. If you don't work, you are not as rich as other people. So they also stay in this social pressure that I don't think it's due to generations before, but then they have this pressure from the family to keep doing all these things like their parents did to stay up in the society.
If you would share one tool, belief, or approach that is a must-have for you as a therapist, what would that be?
Well, as I think every therapist will say, empathy is really important because otherwise the client doesn't feel heard and understood. But for me, the most important thing is authenticity because I think to myself, if I'm not being authentic and just as true to myself as possible, how can I expect the client to do the same? Like, how will he be feeling comfortable with me and being vulnerable, talking to me about his most intimate things and their struggles they are having if I'm not being authentic? I think if I cannot be authentic, the clients cannot either. And then there is just no good rapport to each other. And then there is basically no therapeutical relationship. So if there is not the basic things from the therapy, how can I do anything with the client if the basic isn't present? And I also think that showing myself as authentic as possible, it also shows my flaws, my imperfections, and it shows that even if I'm a therapist, I'm not perfect. I do mistakes as well. And it also takes, in my opinion, a bit of pressure off their shoulders to see, okay, I'm with a professional that does know about mental health. When they come and they actually enjoy being there and learning new things rather than having like a prescription and just having to listen to this person who is really professional. And I'm a bit crazy and I like that and they like it too. So I think authenticity is just the key to a good relationship with the client.